Okay, today I thought we'd talk about the wooden case for the Leslie project. You can just take the information I have here and massage it around to fit your needs. Being that I was working with the Orange Crush amp, that would be the 20 LDX version. It's the larger Orange Crush practice amp. I needed to make sure that the amp would nest inside this enclosure. There is, of course, a board that sits in here with a hole in it that the sound goes through. The board's not being shown right now. So I needed to make sure that my inside dimensions were just slightly larger than the outside dimensions of the amplifier so that it could sit down in there. And when I was doing this project, about the only thing I didn't have laying around was some half-inch plywood. So I did have to go to, well, I didn't have to, but I went to Home Depot and just bought a 2-foot by 4-foot piece of half-inch plywood to cut all the pieces out of. And in my particular case, this would be the bottom board, and the top board sits down inside on top of these posts, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I cut those two pieces first, and in my case, like I say, for my Orange Crush practice amp, that's going to be about 12 1/8. Well, from opening to opening, this bottom one, 12 1/8 on the narrow side and 14 5/8 on the long side, roughly. And made two of those. And of course the top one, which isn't shown in this picture, will have a 6-inch hole because there's a 6-inch speaker in the Orange Crush amp, dead center, so the sound can travel down. And on the bottom board, there's going to be a 5/16 hole dead center that the rotating drum's going to sit on. And also you'll see in more pictures that I took a piece of the 2x2 in the four corners. There's 2x2 supports, and glued a piece of that dead center there too to give more area for the bolt that holds the rotating drum, hold it securely. As long as we're talking about the 2x2s, of course, maybe if you're outside America you don't know this, I don't know, but the lumber that I use for the post and the scrap piece I use down here are called 2x2, which means 2-inch by 2-inch, but that's not what you get. By the time it's gone through a lot of changes through the years, but in reality it's more like 1.5 by 1.5. None of this really matters, just explaining it to you in case you're not from around here and don't know what's going on. So in the case of the side ones, based on how I mounted the motor and where the drum and the belt lines up and all that, I needed my post pieces, which are in this picture, to be about 8 inches, well, 8 3/8, just a little under 8.5, 8 3/8 long for the four corners. And like I say, this one here could be anything. It could go fully from side to side, or it could just go a little bit in the middle. I was just looking for some added support. This picture you can kind of see the posts better, and you see the little added support and the bolt sticking up that's going to be there for the rotating drum. Now these longer side pieces, in the case of my particular amplifier, we'll call that the front and the back. They're going to be height-wise, they're going to be about 10.5 inches tall, and lengthwise I went with 15.5 inches. On the two sides, of course, you're still 10.5 inches tall, but now the length from there to there is 12 1/8 because it fits on the inside. In other words, these outside pieces overlap. They come all the way out. So this is actually the same width as the top and the bottom piece was. The height will be the same on the four sides. That's pretty much the extent of that, but here you can see on the bottom we found dead center to drill a hole for the bolt to go up through. In my case, when I had this board out, I have a drill press. Many of you may not, but I was able to set it on the drill press, which meant I knew it would be level and drill my hole. That way I knew my bolt was going to be not only centered but square in all angles, so the drum wouldn't be sitting at a strange angle. If you just have a hand drill, you're just going to have to do your best and guess at that. Added a few rubber feet so that there'd be no chance of the bolts rubbing on the floor anywhere. This is a top-down view showing the placement of where I put the motor. You could put the motor anywhere you want. If you could put it over here if you didn't want it right there. But I decided I'd stick the motor on one side and the electronics on the other. Like I say, the only thing you have to think about with the motor is that when the drum is down there, you want to take the corners of this rotating drum, there's square corners, and make sure that they won't hit the center shaft of the motor. It has to be able to clear. Other than that, you can put the motor anywhere you want. And as I talked about in the earlier video, adjusting the nuts on this bolt to get the bearing spacing right so that the two pulleys, the motor pulley and the pulley on the drum, are exactly in line so your belt can travel smoothly. So now we're looking at it from the side so you can see a little bit better. And of course you don't have to paint anything, you could just stain it. I decided to cut large openings. A person could cut slots and route it to make it look like an old-time Leslie if they wanted. That would work just as well. It's just more work. Or you could put speaker grill cloth on the insides of the holes so nothing was visible. But again, because I knew I was doing this as a show and tell, I was thinking the more visible the better probably. So again, there's a top board that sits in here that'll have a hole so that the sound from the speaker will go directly down into the rotating drum. And here we are with the board in place and stuck in some more of the window, door, rubber seal, whatever you want to call it, so that when the amp sits down in there, it's sitting on something where it won't rattle and chatter around. Just screw it together and glue it. This is getting into different parts of the build. Let's see if there's any more pictures that have to do with the box. I think that's about it. I've given you the dimensions that I used in the case. And like I say, if you have a different size amp, you just resize things to fit more what you have in mind. You can't go too much smaller because your drum's a certain size and your motor's got a certain size pulley on it. But you could go a little bit larger, a little bit bigger. Or if you know you had a smaller amp and you wanted to build the thing to this size, then you could always add on that board that's in here some walls that help center your amp up so your speaker always centers up nicely in there. I think that's about it for this one. In the next video, we're going to move on to the electronics. We'll go on to the stepper motor driver and the 555 timer that does all of the ramp up and ramp down and speed control and all that kind of cool stuff.